welcome to the Land Rover Toolbox videos again. If you've been following us, you'll know that we've had a blown hub seal on the rear near side of the vehicle. You can see the fluid that's on the disc here, and it's very evident to see that grease has come out of the hub seal itself. If you're observant, you'll also see that the hub seal is actually fitted the wrong way round. There's a few reasons why hub seals actually explode and push the grease out onto the stub axle. One of those could be a blocked breather pressurizing the diff and forcing oil out of the seals, as you can see here on the pinion seal. But in this case, this stub axle has a seal, so the hubs are grease filled and not oil filled, so we'll rule that one out. In this case, our stub axle is worn, and on the seal land where my finger is, it's actually corroded and pitted. You can see that here. Alright, you can see where the seal's been running on the corrosion. Obviously it didn't seal. Now, just as a temporary measure, and this sometimes works, is to clean up the seal land with a piece of emery cloth all the way around, so we're getting rid of any of the pitting. Fitting a new hub seal is necessary every time you pull off the hub. The hub seal needs to be the correct way around, and a little bit of grease is required on the lips to lubricate it. With our stub axle, it actually managed to affect the brake pads, so we've gone ahead and cleaned everything up and changed the brake pads, so we have good braking. Well, that was only part of the story. That was last week, and this week we've managed to get a delivery of a stub axle, or a stub end, which is this. They are different depending on which vehicles you have, and our work did stop the leak of the hub seal. There's no grease on here at all. Alright, now what we're going to do is actually change this, because I'm very pedantic here, and change the backing plate as well. Now there's 3 bolts that hold those on. You can see 2 of them in the picture here, and the one that's where the shock absorber bracket is probably the most difficult to remove. The Salisbury axle on the 300 TDI Defender, FDC 1740. Check for your specific axle because they're not all the same, as I said. I've also chosen to put a mud shield on, which is FRC 2310, and what's vital that is needed is the stub axle joint washer, which is BR 3612. Before you strip out the stub axle, make sure that the level of the diff oil is lower than the casing end, and in this case it looks like it needs an oil change, so I'll be getting that as well. To keep this tutorial short, I'm just going to tell you need to take the caliper off and to remove the hub complete before you get to the stub axle. Now here's a hint to help you along the way. Use a bar. When you're undoing the drive flange nuts, if you see where the bar is between the wheel nuts, this will help you, this is when the wheel's off, to undo the bolts. The caliper itself, be careful of the brake pipe that it doesn't kink if you're going to hang it up out of the way. It'd be safe to say that's exactly what happened to this brake pipe to make it kink. So once we've got to there, 2 of the bolts are actually nut and bolt, so you'll have to remove them in this manner. And once they're off, remember that when fitting them you'll need 2 new nuts, which are M10 by 1.25 thread. The rest of them you can remove. They shouldn't be too much of a hassle, and they are thread locked into place. Once you've got this far, you'll have the top 3 bolts here which hold on the caliper bracket, which is this. Okay, so you can get that out of the way, clean it up if you want in your leisure. That just leaves to take the mud shield off and you have your stub axle. Okay, so this is the exciting bit. Use a hammer and crack it around to break the seal first, and then once that's comfortable, knock it off. Hopefully you won't have one with corrosion in it like what we have. It looks like a set of leaves have settled in there, but clean off the oil to make sure the flange is nice and clean before refitting the stub. Okay, well I'd advise to thread lock the bolts before fitting the stub axle. And then with the stub axle you can see it has a flange here. This is where the gasket fits into. If you paid attention to which way the keyway goes when you removed it, it goes back the same way, in this case facing forward. Right, well I've just put in some locating bolts before I tap this into place. Just make sure that the gasket is straight and the bolt holes are in the right place. So that's just a little bit of a tap and she's home and ready to bolt up. Torque figures from the workshop manual state that it's 65 Newton meters for each one of these bolts to be done up, so that's how we're doing them. Bit of advice here is to go around them once, wait half an hour and then re-torque them again, and then you'll know they'll be perfectly right. So once that's in place, we've got our backing plate on. Just a little hint that one of these has a captive nut. Put some copper slip in it. It'll help you if you need to get them off again. Next job is to get the hub assembly back on again with a new hub seal and checked greased bearings, or possibly they might need to have been changed. So fitting this, I'll give you the heads up. If you have one of these thrust washers, make sure that you fit it back. Don't admit it, don't forget it, otherwise you could be in trouble. The next thing to do is to fit your adjuster nut on. I've taken this back off and I'm putting a clean one back on with no burrs on it. Burrs will stop you adjusting this correctly. Right, so setting the pre-torque or the preload on axles is actually not difficult as long as you understand what a preload or end float actually is. Now, with setting this up on a 300 TDI with 2 hub nuts, I'm going to wind it up. Check that the bearings are moving. Okay, this will seat the grease, and then using a bar, nip it up, seat the bearings correctly, and then take it off by 90 degrees first of all. Alright, next thing to do is just stick on a little bit of end float. Torque figures do vary depending on axle and vehicle, so if you check out our tutorial here, it'll explain more about how to tighten up these nuts. Okay, next thing to do is to put the lock tab and the lock nut on. As you see, you can see the burr there. The burrs will cause problems, so either remove them or face them outwards. The lock nut itself is done up to 50 Newton meters, or that's what it says on this specific axle. So if you're unsure what 50 Newton meters feels like, use a torque wrench. Alright, so the next thing to do is to bend over the lock tabs. Generally, I'll use a chisel and knock it down. You could use a screwdriver or a bar, just as long as the lock tabs lock one way for the adjuster nut and the other way for the lock nut. Then everything is secure and it won't spin itself off while the wheel's turning. So there you have it, that's all set up. Next thing to do is to put a gasket on, and I put grease on it, then glue it to the hub so it's out of the way and not going to get damaged, and put the half shaft in. This can be a bit tricky to get in, but most of the time they just slip into place if you can get the splines into the drive or the diff. The bolts for the drive flange will have thread lock put on the threads before torquing them up, and these are done up to 65 Newton meters. Now that everything's sealed, you can then put your diff oil back in. Right, well, before putting the caliper on, and this is the last operation, is to clean the disc, get all the grease off with brake cleaner.